40,000 men advanced through the desert, convinced that victory was already decided even before the first battle. The sun scorched, the ground seemed endless, and with each step, Rome believed it was marching towards another glorious conquest. At the head of this march was a man who had everything: money, influence, political power. Only one thing was missing: the glory that only the battlefield could offer. What no one there realized was that this absolute confidence was precisely what made that army vulnerable. Far from home, in unfamiliar terrain, facing an enemy that didn't play by the same rules, the Roman legions were about to learn, in the cruelest way possible, that strength and discipline don't always win when you choose the wrong enemy in the wrong place. 40,000 men marched in perfect order under the merciless eastern sun. Their armor gleamed, their banners fluttered with pride, and the metallic sound of Roman sandals striking the dry ground echoed like a promise of victory. To any distant observer, this was not just an army. It was Rome in motion. It was the greatest military machine of the ancient world advancing with the absolute certainty that nothing, absolutely nothing, could stop it. But what those soldiers didn't know, and what would change the destiny of Rome forever, is that this confident march had already crossed the point of no return. At the head of this colossal force was Marcus Licinius Crassus, a man whose fortune was legendary even among the Romans, a name associated with gold, power, and influence. Crassus didn't need that campaign to survive, nor to get rich. He needed something far more dangerous: glory. While other men went down in history by the sword, he was remembered only for his money. And that gnawed at him. In Rome, wealth impresses, but only military victory immortalizes. And Crassus was willing to pay any price to etch his name alongside the greatest conquerors of the Republic. The target seemed perfect. Across the desert stretched the mighty Parthian Empire, possessing valuable trade routes, rich lands, and a reputation that in Roman eyes seemed inflated. To Crassus, those eastern horsemen were nothing more than well-dressed barbarians. Rome had crushed Carthage, subjugated Greece, and humiliated kings and armies throughout the Mediterranean. What could men on horseback do against legions trained from youth to kill and conquer? In the year 54 BC, the decision was made. 7 legions crossed the Euphrates River. There were about 40,000 soldiers, accompanied by thousands of auxiliaries and cavalry. A number so large that, in Crassus's mind, victory seemed mathematically certain. But wars are not won with numbers alone. And in the very first days, silent signs began to appear, almost like whispers of destiny, warnings that could have changed everything if someone had chosen to listen. If you've made it this far, it's because this story has captivated you. A confident army, wrong decisions, and a defeat that changed the fate of Rome forever. And this is just one of many true stories where pride, strategy, and power collided brutally. So go ahead and like this video. Subscribe so you don't miss the next battles that will surprise you even more. And write in the comments which historical confrontation you want to see in the next video. Your participation decides the next episodes. Local allies tried to warn him. They said the Parthians didn't fight like the enemies Rome knew. They didn't form lines, they didn't engage in direct combat, they didn't stand still waiting for an impact. They were fast, mobile, patient. Experienced Roman officers also questioned the chosen route. There was a safe path following the river, with water, supplies, and allied villages. But Crassus chose the desert. Faster, he said. More direct. More glorious. The Arab guide leading him assured him he knew the way well. What Crassus didn't know, or chose not to investigate, is that this man had already sold his loyalty to the enemy. The Mesopotamian heat began to take its toll. June transformed the desert into an open oven. Roman soldiers, protected by heavy armor and carrying enormous shields, marched under a sun that seemed to spare no one. Water became scarce, animals suffered, men stumbled. Fatigue accumulated even before any combat. Still, the order was to move forward. To turn back would mean admitting doubt. And Crassus did not admit doubt. On the other side, the enemy watched in silence. The Parthian commander, Surina, barely over 30 years old, was already known for his intelligence and coldness. Unlike Crassus, Surina didn't need to prove anything. He knew the terrain, he knew the enemy, and, above all, he knew his own strategy. His army was smaller, but it had been molded for exactly that type of warfare. Heavily armored cavalry formed the elite, but the true soul of the Parthian army was the mounted archers. Men capable of galloping at high speed, firing with deadly precision, and disappearing before the enemy could react. On June 9, 53 BC, near the city of Carrhae, the two worlds finally collided. Crassus organized his legions in the classic Roman formation. Shields united, spears at the ready. Absolute discipline. When the Parthians appeared on the horizon, scattered and seemingly outnumbered, a false sense of relief swept through the Roman ranks. It seemed manageable. It even seemed easy. Then, without warning, the sky began to darken. They weren't clouds. They were arrows. Thousands of them cut through the air and descended upon the Roman formations with a dry, continuous sound. Shields were raised, the testudos formed, but it soon became clear that this was no ordinary attack. The Parthian arrows didn't ricochet. They pierced wood, leather, and metal. They nailed hands to shields, feet to the ground, bodies to one another. The impact wasn't just physical. It was psychological. The Romans were being killed without even clearly seeing the enemy. Crassus ordered the advance. The Roman cavalry charged, trying to reach the archers. But whenever the Romans approached, the Parthians retreated, firing backward with almost absurd precision. When the pursuit dragged on too long, cataphracts appeared on the flanks, crushing the isolated Roman cavalry. Within a few hours, the Roman cavalry had practically ceased to exist. Desperate, Crassus made the decision that would seal the fate of his army. He sent his son, Publius Crassus, at the head of an elite force. Young, courageous, ambitious, Publius carried the weight of his father's name and expectations. About 5,000 men accompanied him. For the Parthians, this was exactly what Surina had hoped for. Feigning retreat, the archers lured Publius further and further away from the main army. When the distance was sufficient, the trap closed. Surrounded on all sides, without water, without reinforcements, Publius' men fought to the limit of their bodies and minds. When the arrows ran out, defeat became inevitable. Wounded and surrounded, Publius refused to be captured. He asked one of his soldiers to take his life. Few survived. The final blow came shortly after. The Parthians returned to the main field, displaying Publius' head on a spear. When Crassus saw his son's face, the last thing that still held him together crumbled. The commander who led Rome was now just a broken father. Discipline crumbled. Fear spread. Men began to retreat, the formation opened up, and the slow massacre continued until nightfall. Under cover of darkness, Crassus ordered a retreat. But there was no way to save everyone. The wounded were abandoned. Their cries echoed in the desert, shattering what little morale remained. At dawn, the Parthians resumed the pursuit. Isolated groups were hunted down one by one. Some managed to reach Carrhae. Others fled to the mountains. Many were captured. Exhausted, defeated, and without options, Crassus accepted a negotiation proposal sent by Surina. It was a farce. During the meeting, a carefully planned melee ensued. In the midst of the chaos, Crassus was killed. According to tradition, molten gold was poured into his mouth, a cruel irony for a man whose ambition had cost the lives of thousands. Of the 7 legions that crossed the Euphrates, only 10,000 men returned to Rome. Another 10,000 were taken prisoner to distant regions on the eastern borders of the Parthian Empire, where they would live and die as forgotten soldiers. Rome lost men, lost prestige, and lost something even more valuable, the illusion of invincibility. Now think calmly and imagine yourself in that desert. If you were there in the midst of the legions, at what point did he realize that Rome would not emerge unscathed from that campaign? Was it when the warnings were ignored, when the rain of arrows began, when Crassus' son fell, or only when the escape turned into utter despair? Write it in the comments, because each answer reveals how small decisions can destroy entire empires. And take the opportunity to leave the name of another historical battle or defeat that you think deserves to be told here. The most requested one may become the next episode. The consequences were profound. The defeat at Carrhae destabilized the political balance of the Republic. Without Crassus, the fragile agreement between Julius Caesar and Pompeius broke apart. The path to civil war was open. Years later, Rome would cease to be a republic and become an empire under Augustus. It all started there, in the desert, when confidence met the wrong strategy. This was not just a military defeat. It was a brutal lesson in pride, arrogance, and contempt for the enemy. Rome learned in the worst possible way that discipline and brute force do not guarantee victory when terrain, intelligence, and obvious warnings are ignored. Now, I want to hear from you. What other battle do you think changed the fate of an empire and deserves to be told here on the channel? Leave your opinion in the comments. If this story captivated you until the end, leave a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next videos, and choose one of the suggestions appearing on the screen to continue this journey through history where wrong decisions cost everything. A Roman army of 40,000 men confidently sets off for the Mesopotamian desert under the command of Marcus Licinius Crassus, driven more by ambition and the pursuit of glory than by strategic necessity. Ignoring warnings from allies and his own officers, Crassus chooses a dangerous desert route, trusts a treacherous guide, and completely underestimates the Parthian enemy. Exhausted by the heat and lack of supplies, the Romans face a smaller army, but one far better adapted to the terrain and mobile warfare. The Parthians use mounted archers and a strategy of constant attrition that prevents direct combat and destroys Roman morale. The defeat worsens when Publius Crassus, the commander's son, is lured into a trap, surrounded, and killed, his head displayed to demoralize the army. From that moment on, Roman discipline collapses, the retreat becomes a flight, and thousands of soldiers are killed or captured. Crassus ends up dead in a sham negotiation, and the campaign concludes as one of the greatest military humiliations in Roman history. The defeat at Carrhae not only destroyed an army, but shook Roman politics, broke the balance of the triumvirate, and directly contributed to the civil wars that would lead to the end of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. If this story made you rethink how a single wrong decision can destroy an entire empire, don't let it end here. Like this video to show that this type of content needs to continue. Write in the comments what was the most fatal mistake of this campaign, or what other historical defeat you want to see in the next video. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories where power, pride, and strategy collide brutally. The next disaster could be even bigger, and you won't want to miss it.